Dr. Grant Hardy is here with us today from the History and Religious Studies Department. He is going to help us uncover the patterns of movement that were characteristic of nomadic tribes as it pertains to travel, trade, and encounter. Dr. Hardy, thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
I'd like to start off with questions pertaining to how nomadic tribes traveled. Can you tell me, why did nomadic tribes move often?
Well, part of their lifestyle is to move around from place to place as they're giving food and pasturage to their animals. So they'll move with the seasons. But then there are some larger migration patterns that happen as well, sometimes having to do with political changes or economic changes in the areas. So you see these massive migrations as well as the sort of annual regular migrations.
What role did animals play in travel? Were animals that were used for husbandry treated differently than those used for battle and travel?
Animals were pretty essential to the nomadic lifestyle. That's actually what the lifestyle is based upon. And I think they did use different, I'm thinking of horses, say, and it's, there are differences in how nomads use horses as opposed to pastoral people, to agricultural people. Because plow horses are going to be trained and treated differently than war horses. But with nomads, they're able to use the same horses for their livelihood, for hunting and such, and warfare, which works out is pretty similar activities. So I think the animals are probably used in similar ways when they're in warfare or just for their lifestyle.
Why did nomadic tribes migrate to certain directions or patterns? For instance, why did the Huns choose to expand their empire westwardly rather than eastwardly? And why might the Vandals have migrated south into North Africa?
Okay, I'm not an expert on all of this sort of thing, but I would imagine that the Huns and others, because they're moving around a lot and they're doing a lot of hunting, they're probing some of their neighboring areas and places where they found weaknesses, where they could raid and grab stuff that they needed rather than trading for it. So that's the nomadic trade-off, is you either trade for goods that you need or you raid for goods that you need. And where they found weaknesses, I think they'd sort of push in that direction and then continue pushing if that yielded what they were looking for. So trial and error, I guess, would be a lot of the explanation for why they go in the directions they do.
Moving on to how nomadic tribes traded. Given the nomads were always on the move, how would they have conducted trade with one another? And did they even trade with one another?
Oh, they traded a lot. But they're going to trade products that they're producing. So that's going to be hides and leather and meat products. I think sometimes some metals they might have come across as well sometimes. And then they want to trade the goods that they have for cereal grains, for food, and for manufactured goods. So they have things to trade. In Chinese history, China always is a settled civilization, and they always feel like they're surrounded by nomads. And as I said, you can either trade with them or you can fight with them. And so sometimes as foreign policy, the Chinese would deliberately trade with the nomads, or sometimes give the nomads gifts that then they could use to trade back.
Were there any cities or villages nearby nomadic communities where nomads would gather to share news and trade?
I guess it depends on where they are. Like nomads takes in a whole range, sort of all through Central Asia and then into Eastern Europe as well. So I think there were gathering places, certainly, where different nomadic groups or different clans within nomadic groups could meet and trade and swap information.
Were certain goods valued more highly in some tribes? Were any goods produced by nomadic tribes held as commodities in other civilizations like Rome or China?
Yes. So the goods that are most highly prized, is going to depend on the ethnic group and their customs and what are our scarce resources. For the Chinese, one of the things they most want from nomads is they want horses, because they need to have horses to outfit their cavalry. but China isn't a great place for raising horses, so they would buy horses from the nomads or trade for nomadic horses. That's something they were always interested in. And then, as I said earlier, I think felt and leather and other animal goods.
Lastly, I have a few questions related to how nomadic tribes interacted with their environment and one another. First off, how did nomadic tribes interact with their environment?
Well, they live pretty close to the land. So part of the reason that we have houses is to protect us from the environment, when it's cold or when it's hot. Nomads generally live in tents, so they're much more intimately connected with the environment and the changes of seasons as well. And one of the basic principles of nomadic life is moving from place to place. So there's a lot of very direct interaction.
Additionally, were encounters between nomadic tribes always violent? Were they able to maintain any peaceful alliances?
Sure. Some of the encounters between nomadic tribes were like marital alliances, and that even happens between nomads and civilized peoples as well, or more as static civilizations. So those encounters are going to be not so violent when you're trading daughters, across these lines for political purposes. And then trade encounters don't necessarily have to be violent, and sometimes trade is going to be kind of the opposite of warfare. But they sort of, when warfare goes up, trade goes down, or when trade goes up, then the fighting goes down. They may be proportional or related to each other.
And the last question we have for you today is, several Roman historians and other medieval writers have documented encounters with nomadic tribes. How accurate do you think these writings are? Do they properly reflect the living conditions, government, and ideals of the nomads?
I doubt it. I think it's very difficult to get accurate information from ancient historians who are working with their own, mindsets and biases and things. But that's often kind of the only information that we have to go by. So we use that and then try to sift through it, and then to try to corroborate or to match up what information we get from literary textual sources with archaeological sources as well, and even some modern anthropological investigations of nomadic life. So there's information, it has to be used judiciously when you're looking at what the ancient historians have provided about the nomads of their time.
All right, thank you for your time.
You are so very welcome.